Hey everyone, this is Shari Alexander again, bringing in another phenomenal guest for our video chat, and today it is Mr. Lou Heckler. Welcome, Lou.
Thank you very much, Shari. This is a real kick.
Oh, fantastic. Just to share a little bit about Lou, for some people who might not be familiar with him, he has been a professional speaker for 33 years. That, my friends, is phenomenal. It's a very difficult business, and to last that long and to keep on going is, I look forward to the day when I can say the same. He spent 19 years at, I'm gonna get this right, the University of Michigan's Executive Education Center. So he was educating all the bigwigs and all the companies, correct?
That's right. Yeah, these were business people who came in for like 1 or 2 week programs, and I would do anywhere from 1 to 3 days of their time there.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And he spends his time split between doing humorous business keynotes, and he's not just saying that, folks. I have seen him. He is funny. And he coaches other speakers in their performance as well. He's a fellow speech coach. So, yeah. Lou, today, the reason why I asked you for this call is because I have you in my files as one of the best storytellers.
Thanks.
Well, it's well earned. You have this phenomenal skill at drawing people into what you're talking about, creating these images, building the emotional experience. And what I love about it is, about what you do is, I know you are very particular and methodical, and you have a process, correct?
Yes, absolutely, sure.
Absolutely. So I would love to learn more about that. I'd like to start off, before we talk about what you share with the world, I'd like to talk about what you take in. You are a very highly well-read individual. How does reading play into your speaking?
Well, it's a wonderful question that most people don't think about. First of all, I think it keeps me in touch with so many different ideas, whether it's history, geography, current events, politics, social trends, or whatever, so that in almost any situation in which I find myself, I have something to talk about with people, and I love to talk to people. So once you engage them and they say something maybe slightly different about what they do, and then you can say, oh, I read something about that. Is that like this and this? They say, well, and then they go into a story. Mm-hmm. And I think you learn a lot about what's a compelling story a lot of times by watching the way other people tell stories. I actually think, Shari, that people are naturally great storytellers if they just spin something out as it happens, especially if it's something about which they're excited. That doesn't mean that some people don't tell very boring stories. Of course they do. But I think if you prompt them with a question, and again, I think you don't, sometimes people say, well, I don't know what question to ask. And I think you don't unless you do read a lot and you spend a lot of time kind of, sniffing around, finding out what's going on. It's I don't think I have that speedy recovery like you'd have to play Jeopardy or one of those game shows. But I have read a lot of things in a lot of areas because I'm just nosy, curious. I don't know. I initially was trained in college and in my initial days professionally as a journalist, and I think I still have some of that journalist gene going on.
Right. Well, and when I say you read a lot, it's also, in addition to books, I'm sure, but I always know that you are up to date on current events. And that's one thing that I am, quite frankly, that's one of my weaknesses, is I would rather read a book than read, the newspaper or, my iPad version of the newspaper.
Yeah, well, of course, I read both.
Yes.
The iPad version. But see, the thing is, it's like, for instance, let's take the sports section. I have this great running gag with my daughter-in-law, who is an incredible athlete herself, but is not particularly interested in reading about sports.
Right.
So when we go to visit them, they live in Atlanta, I open the Atlanta paper and I go, wow, it didn't come with a sports section today. And she goes, oh, sorry, it's already in the recycle bin. Well, I get it, and I don't really particularly care who scored 5 and who scored 3 or whatever. I like to read the people's stories. And there are always these in the world of sport, there are lots of very interesting stories, and I hope that the people who are enjoying this interview today, I hope they'll take this as a notion to watch for the stories. Just even if it's a little short story, sometimes I love just those little things that, like you mentioned, USA Today. I love just the quick little squibs about people, because even when somebody does something that we think of initially as sort of curious, it's still a very important part of the human condition that people do those things. And maybe I can capture that when I'm retelling a story sometime.
I think that's an important point, is that for a lot of people wonder, what is the magic that these speakers do? They see the experience and the phenomenon, but they don't understand how that process works. And what I've learned after a number of these interviews, and of course being in the industry for a number of years, is it's about where is your focus. Yes. You can read the sports page and look for the statistics and things, or what you just said, you can search for those little paragraphs of something that's interesting, something that's curious. So what other things do you read from? I mean, are you reading Wall Street Journal? Are you reading New York Times? What all do you read?
Well, we live in Gainesville, Florida. I read the local paper, which up until recently was owned by the New York Times. It's owned by another group now, but it still gives pretty good coverage. We do read the Wall Street Journal. We get about, 7 or 8 different magazines, everything from Southern Living, in part because I love the back page essay by Rick Bragg, the Pulitzer Prize winning biographer and essayist, who used to work for the New York Times and now teaches at the University of Alabama. But I read, the business magazines. I read Inc., INC period, business magazine. I read Fast Company. I think it has good stories about companies on the rise. I don't subscribe to, I do subscribe to Fortune for its business. I don't subscribe to it. We occasionally pick up a copy of Forbes, or I read it online. Also, there's a wonderful app for your iPhone called Newsstand, and we have that. And so that gives us links to all kinds of interesting articles. And also, I have the Boston Herald app on the iPad and the iPhone. And those, I just know from my journalism background, those important papers, the New York Times, the Boston Herald, the Christian Science Monitor, all these, you really need to sort of keep getting exposure to those. First of all, they have very varying viewpoints, conservative, liberal, et cetera, et cetera. But and by the way, believe it or not, the St. Petersburg, Florida Times is one of the best papers in the United States and has produced a remarkable number of Pulitzer Prize winners.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So it's the paper that really is sort of a writer's paper.
Oh, okay.
So I think, ultimately, I hope your listener, viewers, whatever, pick up on this. I think ultimately, to be a good speaker, you have to be a writer.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is a perfect segue into some things that you just alluded to, is in addition to what are you reading, I guess the question is, who are you reading? I would love to know some specific journalists that are good storytellers. Do you have any favorites? You mentioned Rick Bragg.
Well, Rick Bragg is one of the very, very best. There is a woman at the newspaper in St. Petersburg whose name is Lane DeGregory, like D-E and then Gregory. Lane DeGregory. Here at the University of Florida, we live near the university, they had something called the Storyteller Summit 3 years ago, sponsored by the journalism department. It was a 3-day weekend event. I think there were 12 speakers, 5 of whom had won Pulitzer Prizes. Yow. Wow. I mean, it was just, to me, it was like going to an ice cream social. I loved every minute of it. And one of the things Lane DeGregory said, which I thought was just phenomenal, and she is a Pulitzer Prize winner, and she's done all kinds of feature writing. She said, look for the normal in the abnormal, and the abnormal in the normal.
Oh, I like that.
Okay. So look for an instance where somebody's in an abnormal situation. Maybe they're in Afghanistan. Maybe they. I was thinking of years and years and years and years ago when I lived in Richmond, Virginia. There was a $11,000 a year postal worker who gave $1,000 a year to somebody that he read about in the paper that he knew was needy. In other words, he gave almost a tenth. Wow. He was tithing to somebody else in his community. That's the normal and the abnormal. Abnormal for somebody to do that, but he was doing something very normal. But then she said also look for the abnormal and the normal. And one example she gave was a wonderful story she wrote about a mail carrier, again, in her community who was still on one of those old-fashioned routes where you still walked up to the front porch of the house and dropped the letters in the little letterbox by the door. Mm-hmm. And one of his clients was an elderly lady he knew was a widow. And he noticed one day when he walked up the front yard that it needed a lot of attention. And he asked her what was going on, and she said, well, some things had changed about her finances, and she really didn't have money to have a boy come and mow her yard anymore. He said, I'll mow it. She said, well, no, you don't understand. Like I said, I don't have any money. He said, no, I didn't say I wanted money. So he said, I like to do it. I have a little trailer. I've got a mower. I'll come over one day and just mow your. Well, at the time she wrote this story, he was doing this for like 10 or 12 different widows in this area of St. Petersburg, Florida, for no pay. Wow. Just because it seemed like a good thing to do. Now, what a wonderful story. And here's something that I love to do with stories, and I really recommend to people to think about doing this. I call it the challenge. And what I say is, you tell that story, and you tell it with richness, so that it becomes sort of a metaphor for what do the right thing is, or be a good person, or whatever you want to call it. And then you look at the audience and go, okay, let me ask you this. Whose yard in your neighborhood needs a good mowing?
Right.
And you just kind of leave it there. And they know, I mean, some people take it literally, but most people know, he's not really talking about mowing yards, is he?
Right.
He's talking about taking a cake to Mrs. Anderson down the street, who used to do wonderful things for me when I was a child, or maybe fixing, there's that one stone out in front of Mr. Johnson's house on the one piece of the sidewalk that's always bumping up. Maybe I could pull it up and dig under there and smooth it out and put that back down so he doesn't trip on it. Or just, it's that kind of thing where you tell the story of this person doing something very unusual in a usual setting, and then you challenge the audience to think about that in their own lives. I think people get that so much better than if you just said, why don't you go out this week and do something good for someone?
Yeah.
One of my mentors many, many years ago, Shari, said, adults aren't as learning ready as children are, but they are great mimics. So he said, if you tell them a story that they can mimic, then they'll go, oh, yeah, okay, I could do that.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. They're good mimics, so give them the model. That's fantastic. And I think stories can be used so much more in business in general. I know when I just completed one of my corporate trainings and, shared the importance of stories, why stories work, the whole brain learning function of stories, and try to use the story at the beginning and the end. But I think a lot of people still struggle with the idea of, you just telling a story for story's sake. Like you said, some people are good storytellers and you're interested, but then that's the end. And there's no takeaway. And what speakers have to be skilled at doing is tying the story with what you call the challenge. And I love how you just made it not so blatant with that end story of, so what good can you do, rather than whose lawn could you mow in your neighborhood.
I don't know if you do this when you're coaching other speakers, but there's kind of an interesting thing that you can do, excuse me, and that is, it's called, what else is this about? Okay, so somebody tells me a story, and I say, okay, so what do you think that story is about? Well, they say it's about customer service, or it's about being kind to others. And I say, okay, well, yeah, okay, it is. Now, what else is it about?
Yeah.
I get this stare. And I say, well, it's about, I guess it's kind of about thinking creatively. Oh, yeah, it is, isn't it? What else is it about? And we go through this sometimes, and they'll come up with 4 or 5 different things that it's about. Now that story can be put in 4 or 5 different frames, and each one will have meaning. So the key, I think, for the speaker is to say, A story is not just a series of events. It's not just this happened, that happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. It has a deeper underlying meaning. And what you want to go to is you have to know. You have to know. You, the speaker, have to know what this story is really about. Not necessarily that you have to walk up in front of the audience with a big card and go, here's what it's about. It's not like that. But if you know what it's about, then I think that shades the way you put your power behind this story.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know I have my story filing system. What does your story filing system look like?
Well, it was actually inspired by somebody. I was also in the military about 112 years ago, and believe it or not,
you look great. No, I'm just saying, you look fantastic.
Yeah, for 112, not too
it's
bad.
Great.
Believe it or not, I was actually, get ready, a speech teacher in the military. Yes, I was.
Get down, you maggots! So you taught them how to say that really well.
Yeah, that was, get down, you jerks! No, very clearly.
Enunciation.
Yeah, that's right. We taught journalists and broadcasters for all the military services at the Defense Information School, Fort Harrison, Indiana, in those days. It's since somewhere else. I think it's in Fort Lee, New Jersey or something now. But anyhow, one of my civilian colleagues in the teaching department started me on this idea. And I was working next to him at his desk one day, and he reached into his hanging files, and there was a file there that just said gems, G-E-M-S, gems. I said, what is that, Jim? He said, oh, those are stories. I said, well, let me see. So he pulled it out, and there were, in some cases, completely written out stories, in some cases just titles, in some cases a short newspaper article that he thought was a good story. And I said, well, this is all great, but it's not, you don't have it like sort of organized. He said, that's the secret. You don't get too organized. He said, and I believe this, and I have a gems file. So you put that in there because, okay, let's say that today I'm doing a speech about customer service. So I go in there, and if I have it all organized, then it's got customer service. Okay, I'll pull out of my customer service file. But what if one of my communication stories, or what if one of my motivation stories, or what if one of my just funny stories would be perfect in here? And wouldn't I overlook it if it's not in there? So the idea is to be a little bit disorganized or messy. I mean, creativity is sort of messy anyhow, right?
Yeah.
Be a little bit disorganized as I put those in there, so that when I comb through, they go, no. Oh my gosh, yeah, this one here, I didn't think about that one. Yeah, let's do that one. So that's what I do. They're just kind of in a lump because I want to be introduced or reintroduced to them on a frequent basis, so that my mind isn't too organized when I'm still in the creative process.
Yeah, I understand that. And you actually, so a lot of people ask, do I bring up notes? What kind of notes do I have? And you are unique in your quote unquote note system for some of your speeches. Share with our viewers the type of things you bring up on stage with you.
Yeah, well, I do. I always have notes with me. I either have them on 5x8 index cards, or I just have sheets of paper like this. One of the reasons I have that is a lot of times I have things in my hand that were in that morning's newspaper.
Yes.
So I always leave space in my speech, and I expect that I will find something that morning in that town's newspaper, because then I can say, now we're talking about this principle here, and hey, did you see in this morning's Daily Rag that it said da-da-da-da-da here? That's an exact example of what I'm talking about. That gives them recency and relevance right in their own community. But also, I think sometimes I might have a particular quotation that I want to get just right. I may have used it enough times that I could recite it from memory, but in a way, it's a technique. I admit it's a technique. In a way, sometimes I say, there's a quotation here from George Bernard Shaw, and to make sure that I get it exactly right, let me just read it to you.
Yeah. And
I think it has kind of, is that right? Maybe I think it has a little more veracity to it, or a little more
gravitas. Yeah, perhaps.
Yeah, because you have it right there.
Yeah.
Now, because I have a number of those up there with me, I also have one sheet somewhere on the table or wherever near me that has the outline of my speech. So that when I go over to pick that up, sometimes I go, wait a minute, I know it's here, just a minute. Of course, I know exactly where it is. What I'm doing is I'm looking at my outline to make sure that I'm on track.
Gotcha.
And it's sort of a sneaky way years ago, 30 years ago, maybe when I was in the early stages of my career, I had the notion everything had to be in here, and if you use notes, you weren't professional. I think that's baloney. I honestly have never, ever had anybody say to me, well, that was a pretty good speech, but boy, really sorry you used notes.
Right.
Nobody cares.
And
I just want a good message.
Right. And I think it's where most people go wrong that aren't in the professional speaking world is the use of notes. So you use notes, but you're not using notes like this. So
unless I am intentionally telling the audience I'm reading something.
Right. So there's a technique to how you use notes effectively versus not having notes. Some people have, notes within their PowerPoint. For me, like if I'm using PowerPoint, especially for the longer trainings, I'll have like a little fine print note in the lower hand corner, and that's just for me to prompt me like, this is where this story goes. They don't need to know, they don't care, and they never say, oh boy, those asterisks really annoyed me. No, that never does.
And one time I gave a talk, that was based on my ill-fated career as a young man as a baseball player. and 8 years as a catcher in youth baseball.
Nice.
And in that case, I did have a coach, a former minor league ball player. His name was Artie Rosser. And he was one of these guys who, I can do this with a little sheet of paper, it's like an index card. He would come in to practice, and we were, I don't know what we were, 12 years old or something. He'd say, now boys, and he'd pull out this index card, and he'd read some sort of inspirational quotation to us.
Yeah.
And that was kind of our thought for the day. I know that Coach K, Mike Krzyzewski at Duke basketball, does this every day with his kids. He has a thing up on the... So Artie Rosser had these little cards. So when I did this talk based on him, I just carried a bunch of cards up there on the stage with me, and just kind of, without even saying it, I was kind of replicating what he had done for me as a kid.
Yeah.
And I'd say, here's another good quote here. And I just,
Yeah.
I purposely had them. And it was kind of a fun, nobody came up later and said, hey, you did that just like your coach did. But I think it registers at some kind of subconscious level.
It was a nice homage, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, there's that little something inside people's heads going, that's so cool.
So you alluded before to the fact that speakers need to be good writers, and I completely agree with that. But I want a clearer picture of what your take on that statement is. Does that mean that writers should write out their speeches? Does that mean speakers should write out their speeches, or that speakers should be writing articles consistently? Or frame that statement for me and how you view it.
Okay, well, thanks. I do work with some people who completely write out their speeches. I never do that. I work from a topic outline.
Okay.
But sometimes I do write out my stories because I want to do triage on the words. I want to take out the stuff that isn't critical, and I want to make sure that I have action verbs in there, and that I have almost onomatopoeia words. Remember onomatopoeia, when a word sounds like the word it describes? So I want to make sure that if I'm telling about somebody walking across a gravel parking lot, I can say, as he crunched across the gravel parking lot, that's a nice way to do onomatopoeia. But I could also say, so he came across this gravel parking lot. And I really thought about the word gravel, and my voice got sort of gravelly,
Right.
And I think that's what adds to the story. So that's why the writing of it, I think, is so important. It's to keep the story from being unnecessarily long.
Yes.
Stephen King in his book on writing said, and this will be a bad paraphrase, but fairly close. He said, if I over-describe something as a writer, and I would say for us writing our speeches, it robs the audience of their description.
Yeah.
And I was thinking of Anne Lamott, too. Some of your
Bird by
viewers
Bird.
know Anne Lamott, Bird by Bird. She also wrote a couple of very interesting books about faith. because after she had taken every drug in captivity and decided to get clean up in Northern California, she joined this, I think it's a non-denominational church, and people were really wonderful to her and helped her in so many ways. And so her 2 books on faith are just spectacular essays. In one of those, she tells about when her son Sam had some friends over in his teenage years for a sleepover, and she basically said to them, just take over the whole first floor, tell the boys to bring their bedrolls, and unless something's on fire or the house is crumbling, I'll leave you alone until morning. So she said she stayed upstairs and stayed out of the way. And then she said this. She said, when I came downstairs the next morning, it looked like there had been an explosion in a hunting lodge.
Wow. That's brilliant.
That's all she had to say. She didn't have to say this was strewn over that and that was flopped over this and a kid was lying here with his bare leg up.
Right.
Because your picture, Stephen King says, your picture is better. So, I mean, a great piece of knowledge that I gained from reading his book was, you describe only as much as you have to and let the audience take it from there.
Right. Absolutely. And one of my other favorite books on writing that helped me a lot is actually from the journalistic standpoint. And I can't remember the author's name at the moment, but it's on writing well. I don't know if you've read that one.
William Zinsser.
It was William something. I can't remember. And for the watchers, just so you know, if you look below, I will provide links to everything we've talked about thus far from all these books, recommendations, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, good.
So you're absolutely right with I never really thought about that this is what I do, but the only parts of my speech that I do write out, not necessarily memorize, I don't know how to describe that, but I do dissect the stories. And like you said, make sure it's not passive voice, add the active voice, do I have a description of this person? Is that too long of a description? Does it need to be shorter? Is there something I can do with my voice rather than describe something and all of those little nuances that make it fun. So
and a story needs to have somebody that it doesn't necessarily have to be you, but somebody at the beginning that the audience is immediately interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And then there needs to be some tension created because that person is striving for something that, and the audience is wondering, well, will he or she get it or not? And then when they do get it, if that's actually the thrust of the story, that also has to produce some kind of transformation in that person. Mm-hmm. They have to be changed in some way. Mm-hmm. They have to have learned something. Now, interestingly, I know you know this, a lot of your viewers don't. My wife wrote 5 novels, and we were at one of her writers' conferences one time, and somebody who had been, I forget how, somehow loosely involved with the Seinfeld show when it was on, said, I love this, one of the challenges to the writers was, nobody learns anything.
Yes, right. They're all the same.
Right. So that if you wrote a story and it was about X or Y or Z, and you think, oh, well, now finally George or Elaine or Kramer will learn. No, they never learn. I mean, so they purposely, as a humorous thing, flew in the face of what we normally think of as good storytelling.
That's very true.
And their version of that was, nobody learns anything.
That's
nobody
very
grows.
True. Yeah. Well, that's one of the great things about the speaking business in general is you learn the rules just like a jazz musician. You understand the scales, you learn the rules, and then you can decide which rules you want to break.
Yeah.
And then you test things out.
But you gotta learn the good rules first. That's the key.
Oh, yeah. So what are some bad rules that you've heard about storytelling? What are some bad guidelines that people have shared?
Well, I think I can tell you with an analogy. If you presented me with a box of beads and a silver chain and said, hey, Lou, how about making a necklace, like at camp or something? Mm-hmm. I could put some beads on there. I'm not sure you'd want to wear it. Mm-hmm. But if you gave that same box of beads to somebody who knew something about jewelry making, they would choose exactly the right sizes and exactly the right numbers and exactly the right proportions, and you'd be delighted to wear it. So the biggest mistake I think that people make is they think a story is just a string of beads. Ooh. This happened, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and that happened. And so they tell it chronologically, which might be okay if you're writing a timeline piece as a sidebar to a journalism story, but not for something where you want to engage the audience. The audience decides pretty quick in a story whether or not they wish to be engaged with what you're talking about. So, I mean, the other thing I think people, I often suggest this to people is, well, two things. One came from the Storyteller Summit I told you about, and that is one of the fellows, and I forget which one it was, said, every great story constantly, makes a listener say, ooh, what's going to happen next? You know, there's always that anticipation on the part of the listeners. But the thing what I put to my stories when I see something happen in front of me, and I'll give you a quick example of this in a moment, is it big enough? Is it small enough? Okay. Is it big enough, meaning, does it represent something that's a strong thing for people to learn? Is it small enough in that it seems very doable when you tell it to people in the audience, or some version that's doable? Here's just a very quick example from 2 days ago. I was at a shopping center, not too far, about 3 miles from our house, dropped some things off, came back and got in the car, a 7-year-old car, turned the key, nothing. Not even a click. Zip.
Done.
But all the gauges lit up on there, so I knew it wasn't the battery. I thought, bad starter. So I happened to be a member of one of the auto clubs, so I called the auto club, and they said, well, man will be there in 45 minutes. Florida, hot sun, okay, so I go stand in the shade. They took my phone number. Within 5 minutes, a man called me, and he said, Mr. Heckler, I'll be there in 5 minutes. I said, oh, great. So this fellow pulls up. He is around my age. He's in his 60s. He has not shaved. His truck does not look especially great, but that's who they sent. And so I'm immediately sort of judging a book by its cover. And he comes over a minute and he says, are you Mr. Heckler? And I said, yes. And he walked back over to his truck for a moment. I thought, what is he doing? And he reaches into the back of this pickup, and I hear this sloshing. And he picks up a dripping with ice cold bottle of spring water and says, before we do anything, wouldn't you like to have some cold water? I know you hated standing out here in the hot sun.
Wow.
You know, and suddenly it didn't matter how long it took him to get my car started.
Right.
So, you know, if I'm, and it just happened the other day, and I haven't had a speech since then, but if I use that in a speech soon, I'm going to talk about it. There's the where you can use the challenge. Okay, what's your version of a cold bottle of water in the back of a beat-up pickup truck that will astonish and thrill your customers, so that whatever frenzied or frustrated state they're in, it'll just go away. Which is exactly what happened to me. And the first thing, when I called my wife to tell her what happened, what did I tell her about? Not that the cart wouldn't start, that you should have seen this guy come with this big cold bottle of water. Holy mackerel, that was great.
Yeah.
So you find in that story, is it big enough? Yes, because it represents, it's the abnormal and the normal, right? That he would have a bottle of water to hand to his customer. Yeah. And it's also small enough in that some little version of that somebody could do in any business. I don't care what it is. You could have a bunch of those totes type umbrellas behind the counter. And if you look out when a customer's getting ready to leave your store, you'd hand them one of those and say, here, why don't you just bring it back the next time you come in or whatever.
Yeah.
There's a million of those things you could do. Yeah. So that's I think what people lack in stories is they don't know where is that universal gem of truth, and not just of truth, but of doable possibility. Maybe that's redundant, but something where if you tell the story, I want my listener out there going, it's not that complicated.
Yeah.
I could do something like that. Or, my judge, I don't know, you probably do this too, Shari, because you do so much good training. Don't you love it when you look out and you know there are two people there from the same company, and you've just told a story, and one of them's going like this to the other.
Yeah, right. You know? They're pointing at each other across the room is what I see, that one.
Yeah, that one. Or they're doing like, Joe, you could do this.
Right.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's when you know you've got the right kind of story. So be careful about telling too much. Be careful about just stringing together a whole bunch of beads and not really having a meaning to the story. And constantly ask yourself, is it big enough? Is it small enough? I think those are three areas where we can really gain some attraction in telling good stories.
Folks, there's nothing that I could say that could demonstrate Lou's skill than him just sharing how one event 2 days ago and now you just saw it turn into magic, and that, my friends, is what a true professional does. So Lou, thank you so much for your time today. Everyone, I will be sharing Lou's website in the links below, and I'm sure that they can reach out to you, read all your good stuff there. And
LouHeckler.com, real easy.
That's the easy one. And I will say that I'm proud of myself that I did not ask about the heckling, if Heckler was your last name in the professional speaking world. But, that's a whole nother thing.
I get asked that all the time. I say, would I make this up? Would I make this up?
It's too good. Well, Lou, thank you again, and I hope to talk to you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.